You've heard them before. 3 ordinary words. Nothing dramatic. Nothing suspicious. They sound like something anyone could say in a normal conversation. But here's the unsettling part. Those 3 words can quietly expose what someone really wants from you. Not what they say they want, not what they pretend to want, what they're actually aiming for beneath the surface. And once you recognize them, you start seeing people differently. Because most intentions aren't announced. They're revealed. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." So instead of being honest about their motives, people hide behind language. Polite language, helpful-sounding language, reasonable language. But intention always leaks through. Think about it. Have you ever walked away from a conversation feeling slightly off, like something didn't sit right, even though nothing bad was said? No insults, no confrontation, no obvious pressure, just a strange sense that you were being nudged, guided, steered. That wasn't your imagination. That was psychology at work. Because words don't just communicate ideas, they shape behavior. And certain phrases are designed to influence you without you realizing it. Jung warned us about this exact thing. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Most people call it coincidence, or bad luck, or that's just how things turned out. But in reality, they were being guided by language they never questioned. 3 words can trigger compliance. 3 words can spark guilt. 3 words can establish control. And the scariest part? They sound completely normal. You hear them at work, in casual conversations, even from people who claim to have your best interests at heart. This isn't about paranoia. It's about awareness. Because when you understand how intentions are revealed, you stop reacting automatically and start observing intelligently. And once you see these patterns, you can't unsee them. In a moment, I'll break down the 3-word patterns that expose hidden motives instantly. But first, ask yourself this. When was the last time someone influenced your decision without ever telling you what they wanted? Word number 1, trust me, it's. On the surface, this sounds harmless, reassuring even. But these 3 words quietly shift power. Because the moment someone says, trust me, it's, they're not offering information anymore. They're asking for authority. They're saying, stop questioning, let me decide. Carl Jung once said, people don't have ideas. Ideas have people. When someone hasn't examined their own motives, their language starts making decisions for them. Trust me, isn't about helping you understand. It's about bypassing your judgment. You'll usually hear it right before a risky suggestion, a rushed decision, a move that benefits them, or something they don't want you to think too hard about. Not because it's always bad, but because it puts them in control of the outcome. Notice what happens psychologically. The phrase doesn't explain. It doesn't clarify. It closes the conversation. You're no longer evaluating the situation. You're evaluating the person. And that's the trick. Because now the question isn't, is this a good idea? It's, do I trust them? Jung warned, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. People who avoid self-honesty often try to shape external outcomes instead. So instead of saying, I want this to go my way, they say, trust me, it's supportive tone, hidden direction. You're not being forced, you're being led. And here's the key detail. If someone truly respects your autonomy, they don't need to rush your trust. They give you clarity. Trust me, it removes your space to think while pretending to protect you. That's why it feels helpful, but functions as control. In the next word, we move from control through authority to control through emotion, because some people don't guide your choices, they guide your feelings, and that influence runs even deeper. Word number 2. After all, I. This one doesn't sound controlling. It doesn't sound demanding. It sounds personal, almost vulnerable. After all, I. 3 words that quietly shift the emotional weight onto you. Because the moment someone starts a sentence this way, they're not just sharing information, they're building obligation. Carl Jung once said, unconsciousness is not knowing what one is really doing. Most people who use this phrase don't think they're influencing you. They think they're just explaining themselves. But what they're really doing is framing the situation so you feel responsible for how it turns out. After all, I isn't about facts. It's about positioning. It subtly says, I've already invested. I've already sacrificed. I've already done my part. And now, without directly asking, it implies that you should respond. Notice what happens in your mind. You don't feel pressured. You feel obligated, not because of logic, but because of emotion. Jung warned, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. When this phrase hits, it often triggers something inside you, a sense of responsibility, a desire to be fair, a need to avoid disappointing someone. And that's exactly why it works. After all, I doesn't tell you what to do. It makes you feel like you already know what you should do. The sentence never ends with a demand. It ends with silence. And that silence is the pressure. Because now the burden isn't on them to ask, it's on you to respond. This is emotional influence without confrontation, no arguments, no ultimatums, just a quiet shift in the moral balance of the conversation. And here's the key signal. If someone truly respects your autonomy, they can express their needs without making you feel like you owe them. After all, I turns personal effort into leverage. Not loudly, not aggressively, but effectively. In the final word, we move away from emotion entirely and into something colder. Because some people don't want your agreement. They want your position, and they reveal it in just 3 words. Word number 3. This is how. These 3 words don't ask, they declare. This is how. Not a suggestion, not a discussion, a definition. And that's what makes it the most revealing phrase of all. Because the moment someone says, this is how, they're not sharing an opinion. They're establishing authority. Carl Jung once said, where love rules, there is no will to power. When power becomes the goal, language stops being cooperative and starts being structural. This is how doesn't invite your input. It replaces it. It quietly says, the method is already decided. The standard is already set. The hierarchy is already clear. You're not being consulted, you're being positioned. Notice the psychological shift. Before, you were part of the conversation. Now, you're part of the system. Your role becomes smaller. Your options become narrower. Not because you were told no, but because the frame was already built. Jung warned, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Most people don't recognize what just happened. They just feel it. That subtle drop in influence. That quiet sense of being overruled. This is how turns a shared moment into a one-sided structure. And here's the key difference between leadership and control. Leadership explains, control defines, explanation leaves room, definition closes it. When someone says, "This is how we're doing it," they're not guiding, they're finalizing. And the most revealing part, they often frame it as efficiency, or clarity, or common sense. But clarity doesn't require dominance. Respect doesn't require hierarchy. Only power does. This is how isn't about solving the situation. It's about owning it. You don't feel attacked. You feel placed. And placement is the quiet language of authority. Because once the structure is set, resistance feels unnecessary. Questioning feels awkward. Not because you were silenced, but because the room was already arranged. And that's why this phrase is the most honest of all. It reveals who wants influence, who wants control, and who believes their position comes first. So now you know the words. Trust me, after all, this is how. They're not just phrases. They're windows into intention. But knowing them isn't enough. The real shift happens when you start seeing them everywhere. In conversations you've had, in decisions you've made, in interactions you thought were harmless. Because here's the truth. You've experienced this before. Maybe dozens of times. And you didn't even realize it. Think about the last time someone convinced you to do something without actually asking you. Not with threats, not with orders, just with words. Maybe it was at work. A colleague said, "Trust me, it's better if we go with my plan." You nodded. You followed, even though a small voice in your head wondered if it was the right move. Or in your personal life, someone said, "After all, I stayed up all night helping you." And suddenly, you found yourself saying yes, even when you didn't really want to. Or maybe it was a casual conversation where someone said, "This is how it has to be done." And somehow you didn't argue. You just fell into line. That unease you felt afterward, that's your intuition noticing the hidden intention. Not manipulation in a cartoonish sense, but subtle influence running through language. Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." These three words show up all the time. In emails, in meetings, in texts, in casual talks. They're short, seemingly harmless, and easy to ignore. But when you look back, you'll notice the pattern. The times you agreed too quickly. The times you felt pulled without realizing why. The times your autonomy quietly slipped away. That's what makes this knowledge dark. Because it's not obvious. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't shout. It just nudges, guides, positions. And if you're not paying attention, you'll keep giving away influence you didn't realize was even at stake. The good news, once you recognize it, you start seeing the intention behind the words. And awareness is everything. Because suddenly, conversations don't feel the same. Interactions don't feel neutral. Decisions don't feel automatic. You start seeing influence for what it is, and you reclaim the space that's rightfully yours. You've seen the words. You've seen how they guide, nudge, and position people. But here's the kicker. Most people never notice. They walk through life thinking conversations are neutral. Decisions are theirs. Interactions are fair. They don't realize that influence is happening right under their noses, and that's exactly how it works. So why most people never notice? Think about it. How often do you replay a conversation and realize later, wait, I wasn't actually deciding that. I was being guided. Most people never reach that moment. Because influence like this is subtle. It's short. It's hidden in ordinary words. It doesn't feel like manipulation. It feels like normal interaction. Like the way things always are. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." That's exactly what's happening here. People are so focused on the obvious, the loud arguments, the direct orders, the drama, that they miss the quiet influence shaping every choice, every action, every yes and no. Words like, "Trust me, it's, after all, this is how." They slip by, they blend in, they feel familiar, and because they sound normal, our brains don't flag them as manipulation. We think, they must know best. I should probably go along. It makes sense, I guess. And that's the trap. Most people never notice because they've never been trained to look for intention in words. They react emotionally instead of observing rationally. They assume everyone has their best interest in mind. They assume words are neutral. They assume that politeness equals honesty. Jung also said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. And that irritation, that tiny, uneasy feeling you get when something feels off, is your unconscious signaling that influence is happening. Most people ignore it. They push it down. They tell themselves it's nothing. But awareness changes everything. Once you notice the intention behind words, you start seeing patterns everywhere. You stop walking into traps you didn't even know existed. You reclaim control over your decisions. And the scary truth is, once you start noticing, you can't unsee it. Because these words, these intentions, are everywhere. In work, in friendships, in family. Even in casual interactions that seem harmless. And that's why this knowledge is so dark. It's not the words themselves that are dangerous. It's the fact that most people never notice them, and those who do can see the truth behind nearly every interaction. So now you know why most people never notice. They hear the words, feel something slightly off, and move on, thinking it was coincidence or just how people are. But awareness changes the game entirely, because once you start recognizing the real intentions behind words, something inside you shifts, something powerful, subtle, and irreversible. Here's the truth. Most people live their lives reacting to requests, reacting to suggestions, reacting to influence they don't even see. And when you react, you hand over control. You give away influence without even realizing it. But there's a shift waiting for you. A shift from reaction to awareness. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Awareness is exactly that. It's seeing the intention behind the words before you act. It's noticing when someone says, "Trust me, it's," and asking yourself, do I need to trust or just evaluate? After all, and feeling the obligation without automatically saying yes. This is how, and realizing you have a choice, even if the structure tries to convince you otherwise. Awareness doesn't make people manipulative. It makes you conscious. It turns those little nudges into information. It turns guilt into recognition. It turns authority into observation. And the best part? You don't need confrontation. You don't need drama. You just need clarity. Because once you see the hidden intentions, you stop reacting automatically. You stop feeling subtly pressured. You stop being steered by language that pretends to be neutral. You start observing calmly. You start asking yourself, what is actually happening here? Who benefits from this? Am I making this choice, or am I being nudged into it? That's the real shift. From being a participant in unconscious influence to being an observer with full awareness, from giving away your decisions without realizing it, to reclaiming your autonomy in every conversation. And the subtle irony, most people will never notice. They'll keep being guided by words that seem innocent. But once you notice, you can't unsee it. Every interaction becomes clearer. Every decision becomes yours. And here's the most powerful part. You can respond, not react. You can engage, not comply. You can interact, not be influenced. That's the knowledge that feels almost too dark to share, because once you see it, you realize just how often influence is happening all around you, and how rarely anyone actually notices. So you've seen the words. You've felt the subtle pull of influence in conversations you didn't even realize were steering you. You've noticed how, trust me, it's, after all, and this is how, quietly shape decisions, emotions, and authority. But awareness alone isn't enough. Just noticing the manipulation doesn't give you back control. Because awareness without action, it's like seeing the trap, but still stepping into it. The next step is crucial, knowing how to respond without losing your power, without causing conflict, and without letting influence slip by unnoticed. This is where you take the knowledge and turn it into strength. Once you recognize the words, you can do more than just feel the influence. You can choose your response. Carl Jung said, "Knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darkness of others." And that's exactly what this is, learning to navigate influence without being consumed by it. Here's how it works. 1. Pause before reacting. The moment someone says, "Trust me, it's," or "After all, I," take a breath. Don't answer automatically. Observe. Ask yourself, who really benefits here? Am I reacting or being guided? 2. Neutral acknowledgement. You don't need to confront. You don't need to argue. Simple phrases like, "I understand," or "Let me think about that," give you space and prevent you from being nudged unconsciously. 3. Redirect to facts. If someone uses "this is how" to establish authority, bring the focus back to objective information. Ask questions. Clarify steps. Facts take power away from subtle dominance because they require cooperation, not compliance. 4. Hold your boundaries quietly. Awareness lets you decline, defer, or suggest alternatives without drama. You don't have to justify yourself. You don't have to explain your choices. You simply act from clarity rather than reaction. 5. Observe the pattern. Don't take it personally. Influence is everywhere, but it's rarely about you. It's usually about someone's need for control, reassurance, or validation. When you detach emotionally, you reclaim the space for clear decisions. The shift is subtle but transformative. You're no longer the one being guided by hidden words. You're the observer, the thinker, the one who decides. And here's the most important part. You can do all of this without confrontation, without drama, without anger. Because power isn't in reacting. Power is in awareness, in calm observation, and in choosing your actions deliberately. Once you master this, every conversation becomes different. Every decision becomes yours. Every interaction reveals truth instead of hidden agendas. And that's the bridge into the final section, where we wrap it all together and reveal why this knowledge feels almost too dark to share. Once you know these words, you can never unhear them. You'll start noticing them in every interaction. At work, when a colleague frames a project for their benefit. In friendships, when someone nudges decisions emotionally. Even in casual chats, when someone positions themselves subtly above you. And every time you hear them, you'll realize how much influence is happening quietly, and how rarely anyone actually notices. It's the kind of knowledge that changes your perception of people forever. Because once you recognize the exact words, you start seeing hidden intentions everywhere. And that's why this knowledge feels almost too dark to share. Because it's not about suspicion, it's about clarity. It's about seeing the world as it really is, and noticing who is quietly shaping it around you. If this opened your eyes to how words really influence you, hit like and subscribe. Comment below. Which of these 3 words have you noticed in your life? Thanks for watching.